Hi, I'm Keith Nitka, Battleship Operations Manager, and thank you for joining me today on this virtual adventure. So as you guys know, you've been watching the virtual adventures. We like to do behind the scenes sort of stuff. So today, this is very much behind the scenes. This is not on any of the tours. And as a special guest, I have a man who actually worked in this area, shipmate of mine, very good shipmate of mine, who was here on board the ship during Desert Shield and Desert Storm with me and worked in this space. We're on the O4 level just behind the pilot house. The AG workshop, or aerographers' mates, worked in this area. Now, for those of you that don't know, the AGs, or the aerographers, are weathermen. They're the weathermen on board the Battleship Wisconsin. Because we are a capital ship, we carried aerographers with us, and they were then responsible for doing the weather, predicting the weather, so that we knew when we could attack the enemy or do anything like that we needed to do that where weather might be a factor. So I want to introduce you to AG2 Hooker, BJ Hooker. He was on board the ship with me, worked in this space, so he's going to tell us a little bit about what he did here on board the battleship, specifically in this area, what the aerographers' mates were responsible for. BJ, thanks very much for doing this with us today. I appreciate you coming out here, and thank you, and welcome back home to the ship. So, if you don't mind, if you'd just tell our viewers here just that, what exactly AG does on board a ship like this, and walk through the different areas of the space.
Sure. Thank you, Keith. As mentioned, AG2 Hooker, formerly known as AG2 Hooker, worked in this space here. We had weather observers and weather forecasters, so we did anything range from monitoring the weather outside. We started off here in this back room where the weather observer actually worked, took weather observations every hour on the hour, had a chart that they plotted. We went upstairs to the 05 level, took atmospheric conditions, came back, plotted it down, took temperatures, wind speeds. We have instrumentation here that would track, wind speeds. But also, too, at the same time, we would collect information from other locations, would come in through teletype prompts, and we would plot that information here on this plotting table. We also would upload information into, there's a computer system here, but we also did other things like bathyothermographs. We did temperatures in the ocean down about 1,500 feet, which is used to track, how sonograms moved in the ocean to track submarines. We also, too, launched a weather balloon in the aft part of the ship. So those radio sondes that was connected to the weather balloons would send that information back through here. We would monitor that information, and it would go up to about 30,000 feet up in the atmosphere, okay, and track those weather conditions throughout. What was all this information used for? Pilots used the information. Their flight patterns. We would report our weather conditions, as well as other ships in the Navy too would be doing the same thing, reporting their information. So all that information would come together globally. Back in that day and age, 30 years ago, I can imagine technology has changed, drastically. But it was amazing even back then, how the information would come together as a whole, naval fleet, and pulling all the information together. We would track the information together, put together our own weather forecast, plot the information out here, go update the executive leadership of the ship, the XO, the captain. Captain, usually as we were getting ready to depart out of port, or we were pulling into port, and the XO every day as we were underway, okay, just to report, the weather conditions for the next 24 hours. So anything coming up, if we may have to divert, our track aboard ship. So anyway, yeah, lots going on here. Very exciting times, as mentioned. We had weather observers, weather forecasters. Had in our group, the OA division, we had about 10 to 12 of us. Okay. Operated a 12-hour shift, 12 on, 12 off. As you can see, it's a very small, compact space here, so we were very close and comfortable in that time.
Ah. Yeah. So I'm guessing then, so if there were 12 of you, because that was actually one of my questions, how many of there were you? If there were 12 of you, I'm assuming with the 12 on, 12 off watch, you were split in half then.
Correct.
You had two teams, so there were 6 on and then 6 off for those 12 hours.
Correct.
Now, in navigation, when we weren't standing watch, so navigation, of course, is all out at sea. Our work job requires us to work out at sea, but in port, we don't have a lot of work to do. But when we're out at sea, if we're not on watch, we are doing something as far as work during working hours. Did the AGs have to do that as well, since you were 12 on, 12 off? Did you have guys at work when you were not standing watch during working hours?
Absolutely. We did various things throughout the ship because the ship is its own supporting, city, call it. So some of us would have to break off and go do temporary duty assignments in other locations around the ship.
Okay.
I myself, as well as many others, had to go off and do mess duty work, outside of the 12 hours that we were on. But we had to clean up passageways, clean up our own space, maintenance our own equipment. So there were other things going on in that 12-hour shift rather than just doing weather.
And then, what exactly does an aerographer's mate do during general quarters? Because it's not like you're actually manning a gun in here. So tell me about your general quarters station.
Yeah, so they really only needed 2 to 3 of us to monitor the current weather condition. Needed an observer, needed a forecaster, and needed someone to run the information, back and forth to the radioman's workspace, the signalman's workspace. Other than that, the other 9 to 10 of us were kind of disposable. But again, like I said, this is a fully operational, standalone, functional operation. So some of us, including myself, we would break off and go into. I would work in a magazine, pumping, ammunition in the 5-inch armory. Others of us, would go and work in other locations to support the whole general quarters of the operation. Some of us would go work in the signalman's office. Some would go work up in the crow's nest, and just the various things that needed to be done around the ship.
Okay.
So yeah, functionally, we only needed 2 to 3 to maintain the current weather conditions, but others, all hands on deck to support the ship.
Okay. So you specifically worked in one of the 5-inch gun mounts.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you again for joining me today on my virtual adventure, and again, welcome back to the ship.
Yeah, glad to be back. Glad to be back.
Thank you. So thank you again for joining us today on this virtual adventure. I do hope that you can take the time to come out here and visit the ship. It's one thing to see it here on the screen like this, but to actually see it live and in person, you really get a sense of how big and massive this floating city at sea truthfully is. So again, my name is Keith Nitka. I'm the Battleship Operations Manager, and I want to thank you for joining us today on our virtual adventure.